You always hear about video games from the 80s and 90s, but never the 70s. Why don't people talk about the 70s in terms of anything? I mean, yeah, you do hear 70s related stuff sometimes, but come on. Whenever you do, it's always shit like fucking Taxi Driver. Fuck that movie. Yes, video games from the 70s do in fact exist. No, I am not pulling your leg. Most people, when they think of the oldest games that they could think of, are from the 80s. And honestly, when I hear that, I think back to myself and I'm all like, wait a minute, guys. Video games existed for much longer than that. I mean, hell, some of the oldest video games ever made date back to the 1950s. Hell, the Atari 2600 in and of itself was created in the 70s. So, might I ask, why don't people pay attention to these games? Well, it's simple, really, because not a lot of these games, made it into long-running franchises. The oldest game that anyone could ever think of that made it into a long-running franchise is Pac-Man, and that came out in the year 1980. Oh, 1 year close. But whatever the case may be, I'm here to set the record straight. Video games from the 70s do exist and deserve to be talked about. Let's start off with a little classic that is only known as Computer Space. Yes, that's what the arcade cabinet looked like. Pretty experimental if I do say so myself. If I were to get any vulgar with it, I'd say that this looks like a butt plug. I love being vulgar. But yeah, let's just see what the game is all about. Now, yes, I am using an online copy of this game because of the fact that, well, honestly, I don't know how I would emulate something like this. I remember a while ago I tried to emulate Asteroids, which this is a very similar game to, but it didn't end up really working too well. So, with this one, I had to resort to using an online copy of the game, which, from what I can tell, is pretty close in line to the original. And honestly, this is as basic and bare bones as you can get. Now, the thing about it is that when it comes to most other people who review video games, they wouldn't know where to start with this. But for me, I would like to talk about how this could be played competitively. You see, the thing about it is that with these games made back then, they were more so focused on trying to be, played for sport as opposed to being played to tell a story, right? And so because of that, you have points which ultimately, show you how good you're doing in the game. Now, the objective of the game, from what you can tell, is to shoot down the little flying saucers, and the weird thing about it is that I think they knew how inaccurate the aim can be sometimes, so what they did was that they made it so that you could control the bullets that you have. And honestly, I feel like that was a very clever decision on the developer's end, given how, you have two little saucers, you only have one bullet at a time before the bullet disappears, and what ends up happening is that you might end up, wasting a lot of time if, you don't get your shot correctly, so they just went along and said, whatever, let's make it into a homing missile that you can control. And honestly, good on you, developers. That was a very good decision. Now, you see, the thing about it is that, this was made in a time where, the only double digits that you'll get were in the timer. So, eventually, what happened is that if you reached a number over 9, what ended up happening was that it moved from numbers to letters, and honestly, I feel like it's a very clever way to circumvent trying to do too much, at the time at least. That's actually really cool that they did it like that, But yeah, how's this game fare competitively? Well, I think it's enjoyable enough as an experience, Now, I like games like Asteroids, so as you can tell, this would be right up my alley because I like it when, you know, what I describe this game is like almost like a hockey puck physics, Like you're controlling a hockey puck, right? The little spaceship, it moves around. If you push it around a little bit with its thrusters, what ends up happening is that, it starts to slide around the screen almost, kind of like a hockey puck, right? And I feel like with that, it controls very well, shockingly. Now, a lot of people have complained about certain controls in certain games being too slippery. While you would imagine that it would be a problem here, it kind of isn't. I mean, to be fair, they don't give you much on the screen to really get in the way of you being able to do what you need to do. So maybe that might be it. I don't know, but whatever the case may be, this is a really good game competitively because, like, there is some challenge to it too, Like, as I said before, because of the slipperiness, you might have the potential of, accidentally landing into the enemy ship or even sometimes even the bullets that the enemy shoot, right? Now, I did say before that this wasn't too much of an issue, and that's because, it only really happens if you're spawned in a really weird area or if the spaceships are like positioned in like a way where it's like, really weird. So, yeah, but the thing about it is that, I feel like that this game, right? If more people were to pay attention to it, I feel like you'd realize that it aged pretty well. Now, I know some people may hear that and disagree, and that's because I feel like we're kind of spoiled today, because, like, today we have a lot of stuff that, contributes whether or not a game is good or not. But for me, all I gotta say is, if it's fun, it's a good game. And if it's not fun, then why bother? Now, I did already bring up asteroids, and I feel like that would be a good place to go off of next, because with that game, I feel like that it's closer enough to really give a comparison. So let's boot it up, shall we? Now, yes, I am using another online emulator for this, but that's because, yet again, as I said before the video, this was kind of hard to emulate, so I used an online emulator. Now, the thing about this game, Asteroids, is that it does everything that Computer Space does, but better. You see, with Computer Space, that game only had, two enemies on screen at all times, right? However, with this game, it has multiple, right? And they're all asteroids, as can be, seen from the name, right? Yes, occasionally a little spaceship shows up, like how it does in the other game, but with this one, there's tons of asteroids to shoot down and all that stuff. And not only that, but while yes, this game definitely has more, it also has stuff to make it better, too. Physics are as smooth as butter, and honestly, I just love it when games are like that. I said before that, in my opinion, Super Mario Bros. 1 is better than Super Mario Bros. 3. And while yes, 3 may have more stuff in the game, 1 has that smooth as butter physics to it, that feeling of momentum. And for Asteroids, this would be that game's 70s equivalent. Smooth as butter, like sliding on ice, right? It is so, well, for lack of a better term, nice, And I like that when they include that in games like this. Now, here's something I think would be pretty interesting. What if we also covered the Atari 2600 version? You know what? Yeah, let's do that. Ooh, it's in color. That must mean it's better than the arcade version, right? Well, no, not exactly. Well, yes, this one's easier to emulate since I'm using Stella. At the same time, it's nowhere near as smooth, it's a bit jagged when it comes to the way it moves, and not only that, but because of its less fluid movements, that means that the massive amounts of asteroids on screen makes the game less fun and more so annoying. So, yeah, the Atari version is nowhere near as good as the arcade version. However, it still is somewhat enjoyable, but it's still a downgrade nonetheless. So, honestly, I would more so recommend the arcade version as opposed to, this, because it's not as good. It's a downgrade. You know what I mean? Yeah, I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. Because, yeah. You know what? There's another version of Asteroids I would like to take a look at, and that's the Game Boy version. Let's take a look, shall we? Game Boy version is kind of a mixed bag. Like, yes, it may have better graphics, and yes, it may be slightly easier, I guess. The weird thing about it is that, like, it's not as smooth as the arcade version. So, yes, this is kind of like the Atari version, but it's better than the Atari version, though, in that regard, since it's smoother than that version, right? But what's worse about this version to the Atari version is that the aiming is so imprecise. Like, you don't really get a full directional input on where to aim, so it gets really annoying when it comes to aiming at enemies. So, yeah, I don't know what to say about this version of the game. So, I guess what I could say is that it's better than the Atari version, but still not as good as the arcade version. I hope that makes sense. Alright, let's talk about one more game, Space Invaders. Okay, so this game is very different from the previous ones we talked about. It's slow, but it's not very smooth. So do I like it? Well, shockingly, yeah. Like, basically the whole thing about it is that unlike the previous games, it's not about maneuvering around the screen, but how many aliens you can shoot down, right? And basically the whole thing with this is that, you gotta hide behind cover and move around and, it's like that, right? So, because of that, it's not really as bad as you'd think I'd think it is. It's actually pretty good. And I think that comes to mind when you think of the difference between this game and the previous ones when it comes to how it's competitive. Like, yes, it's still competitive in the way where you shoot down the bad guys, but it's more so competitive in the way on how you do so, not really, if you do so. I'd recommend giving this game a shot just to see what I'm talking about. It's really good and I'm sure you'd love it. In conclusion, the 70s was actually a pretty good time for gaming. I mean, yeah, it may not have been as big and grand and robust as all the other decades after, but it was still pretty good. And I recommend you guys give more 70s games a shot. I mean, I know I'm glad that I did, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys, spread it around and, give more 70s games a shot. So, yeah, see ya.